Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning session of the Public Accounts Committee. This morning we are going to look at Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, Customer Service and Accounts for 2023-24. This comes on the back of previous consideration by the committee of HMRC's customer service levels, which had reached an all-time low at that point, and obviously of concern not only to the committee but to everyone else, and also to recent reports from the National Audit Office which showed the picture of that customer service level was not improving. And indeed, telephone answering performance has continued to decline. I know it's a very stark figure, but I'm told that customers cumulatively spend nearly 800 years on hold waiting to speak to someone, which really I know is terribly frustrating for anyone who goes on a telephone line and waits for long periods of time waiting for an answer. So we're looking today at how the department has improved, or if it plans to improve those performance levels in future, and to look also at the gap between what should be collected and what is collected, the tax gap again. Though I have to say, on the positive side, I understand all the accounts were signed off and audited before the summer recess, which is quite an impressive performance for an organisation as complicated and challenging as yours is, Sir Jim. So I'll begin by welcoming you to begin with, Sir Jim Harra, who is the first Permanent Secretary and Chief Executive of HMRC. Thank you for joining us this morning. Would you like to introduce your colleagues at the beginning who are with you today?
Yes, good morning, Chair. So I have with me Myrtle Lloyd, who's the Director General for Customer Services, and Justin Holliday, who's the Chief Finance Officer of HMRC.
Well, you're both welcome as well. Before I move on to ask colleagues, members of the committee to begin asking questions, just want to apologies for Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, who's the chair of the committee. Sir Geoffrey is away today, sends apologies. He has unavoidable personal commitments, which we know about and understand. And he sends his apologies to you, Sir Jim. So I'm in the chair today instead. Right, let's move on to one or two issues that were there from the last sessions the committee had. One of the things the committee looked at previously was the fact that you'd had a plan, indeed had implemented a plan to move to, I think, 12 major hub offices, but the committee was concerned that you'd entered into long-term leases on some of those, I think at least 6 of them, when property prices were quite high, and you probably now have buildings worth less than they were when you bought them. So could you tell us what are you doing now to get any extra value out of those long leases which you entered into at very high values?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I'll maybe ask Justin Holliday to come in a moment. So in 2015, we announced a strategy to reduce from 170 small offices into now 14 regional centres and a small number of specialist sites. And we have largely completed implementation of that programme. And that has enabled us to provide significantly better accommodation for our staff, which enables them to work in the way that we want to work, and has also enabled us to make considerable savings on our estate's budget. Generally speaking, that has involved us entering into 20 to 25-year leases, because our own experience and our professional advice was that that is the best way, sort of commercial way, to get the accommodation that we want at the right rate. We have a small number of freeholds that we own as well. We own the freehold of our regional centre in Croydon, and we'll also own the freehold of Portsmouth when it is built as well. That programme is actually on course to be delivered for the whole life cost of the programme to be slightly less than we forecast back in 2017, although the investment costs are slightly higher within that, but overall it will come in for slightly less and will deliver significant savings and cost avoidance to us as we move to the new estate. But Justin can give you more details about the advice on which we've acted.
So if we look back to 2015, HMRC had a choice, which was to allow a PFI contract to carry on, or to start with to let that PFI contract end and to replace the estate. So we had no choice on the timing, Chair, because it was driven by that PFI contract coming to an end. I mean, as Jim says, I think we are proud that we have now a fit-for-purpose estate for our staff. If any of you visited HMRC offices before, you would have been embarrassed by the quality of the accommodation we gave our staff. I am now not embarrassed when I visit our staff in their offices. And as Jim said, the running cost of that estate is lower than it was under the PFI scheme, and it is even lower than it would have been if we had extended that PFI scheme. There is a long-standing disagreement, I think, between certain members of the committee and us about how we have done that. Those decisions have all been made. As Jim said, our decisions were based on professional advice. Some of those decisions are water under the bridge, I think. In terms of how we are ensuring that we continue to get good value from the estate, probably worth saying two things. The first one is we have not stuck rigidly to the strategy that we set out with in 2015. We have got a couple of extra sites because that was the right thing to do as events unfolded. And initially and it was the then government's general position, we entered into leases, and as Jim has said, as the position has evolved, we now have a couple of freeholds as well as leases. So the position has evolved. And the second thing is what we're doing to ensure that that estate is fully utilised, and we have extensive subletting to other bits of government. So where we do have a bit of spare estate in one of our regional centres, we will let it to other bits of government and are successfully doing that. And there's something over 50 different government bodies also occupy HMRC regional centres or government HMRC run government hubs.
Is that reducing the cost?
It's reducing the cost to HMRC and ensuring that the aggregate cost to government is best value.
Yeah, so we expect to recover about £36.6 million from other government departments this year, and that will rise to almost £40 million next year from the subletting.
Right, so is the overall cost of the programme less than it was forecast to be at the beginning?
So the whole life costs of it are slightly less than we forecast in 2017. Back in 2017, when we, based on our sort of base case, it was 2.835 million. We now expect it to be a little bit less than that, but it's broadly speaking the same. The investment costs within that, because I've recently received a letter from the Chair, which I will reply to, but it compares the investment cost with the whole life cost, which are two different currencies. But the original investment cost was £552 million in our 2017 business case for over 10 years. Over 15 years now, it's £953 million.
I'll come back to you in a second. Have you got spare capacity still around that you need to do something with?
Yeah, so I think the capacity in these spare capacity falls into two different categories. There are some areas that HMRC occupies which are greater than our current needs, but which we have to have because we are going to be increasing the size of our workforce, and the recent budget describes the numbers. And then there is also estate that we don't occupy but which we need to sublet to other government departments, which would otherwise be empty. But as Justin says, we have successfully done that in those hub buildings. I think it's 61,000 square metres has now been let to 52 government departments. So we expect our capacity to get more and more constrained, however, as our workforce grows over the next few years.
Thank you very much. Two just very quick questions, really. One is, does the HMRC have a estate management strategy? And how does that align with the workforce strategy? I think you just alluded to it slightly. And the second is, when you sublet properties to other government departments. What is the almost formula for that? Is it at a subsidised rate because it is a government department, or are you applying market rents, for example?
Okay, so I'll answer the first part of that and maybe I'll give the second part to Justin. So we had a location strategy in 2015 which drove our decisions about locations of sites and their size and the sort of commercial approach to that. As Justin mentioned, we have adjusted that strategy over time because our workforce plans had to change. And for example, we have added a couple more sites compared with 2015. So we do have a formal location strategy, and obviously the government that dovetails with the government strategy because of the 14 regional centres that we've built. 12 of those are also government hubs, so we have provided that for the whole of government, hence the subletting to departments. Justin, do you want to pick up?
Sorry to interrupt. I had something else in mind, which is the almost annual review of how you manage those estates, so that you have confidence that you are charging the right amount compared to the market rate, whether it is a government department or not, and then of course the ongoing day-to-day maintenance as well. Yes,
so two aspects of that. So we are responsible for the ongoing facilities management in the regional centres, and we have recently had a sort of comprehensive review of that and re-let the contract for that, and we reviewed what facilities we wanted and what a reasonable price was for that and what savings we could make. In terms of subletting, whilst we are open if necessary to sublet to tenants from outside government, I believe that all of the letting that we've done so far has been to other government agencies and departments.
So all the letting currently is to other bits of government, and what we charge them is a fair proportion of the cost of that particular building. So it's pro rata to the amount of space they're occupying in the building.
Is it a market rate, or is it I'm not making a value statement.
No,
I'm just wondering, is it a market rate, or is it a subsidised rate, so to speak, because it's a government department?
The overall rents are marked to market on the rent review period, which is typically every 5 years. The tenants pay a proportion of that, so it is broadly a market rent, but we're not charging it to make HMRC doesn't make a profit. It's simply charging the proportion of the rent that other tenant is occupying.
And is a 5-year rent review appropriate? Is that frequent enough?
That's market normal. What we've sought to do, in moving away from having a PFI scheme, which let's just say they were often unusual in terms of the market. Our driving mantra commercially has been to go to something that is normal in the property market.
Sorry, Chair, just one final question, just slightly going back to the maintenance of the buildings, which is a revenue cost to the HMRC. Are you confident that you are getting value for money through those contractual arrangements?
So we have just very recently re-procured that with the aim of getting the right value for money, and I don't know if you want to give any...
So as Jim said, we have both rethought and then re-procured how we deliver facilities management in the buildings. We have consolidated some of our contracts because we thought it would give us better value for money, and the contracts that we've just announced are going to save us across the country about £10 million per annum. And we've let those on a 5-year basis, and I imagine in 5 years' time we'll be doing that again and rethinking again how we package that up to get best value.
Okay. Just one further question before we come on to the main parts of today's business. The committee previously had correspondence with you about the Making Tax Digital programme and whether separate assessment should be done with regard to VAT and income tax self-assessment elements. Have you made any progress in that?
Yes, so we have already implemented Making Tax Digital for VAT, and all VAT payers now use that, and we have processed millions of returns through that. And so the feedback on that from users is that they are finding it easy to use, and we can also see that it is improving compliance rates, so it has reduced the level of error in VAT and has brought us benefits as a result, which are all certified by the Office of Budget Responsibility on the budget scorecard. We're now in the process of implementing Making Tax Digital for income tax self-assessment, So we have already got a sort of private beta test service being used by a small number of users, but the first cohort will come onto that from 2026, and then there'll be a further cohort in 2027, and then at the budget on the 30th of October, the Chancellor announced that a further cohort will come on after that, sometime in this Parliament, still to be announced.
So you've now got a value for money assessment of what's happened on VAT,
Yes.
and one about the expectations about income tax.
Yes, and so we can present those separately, and they are both certified by the Office of Budget Responsibility for the additional revenues that they bring in.
Okay, thank you for those answers, and we move on now to the first of our main topics for today: reducing the tax gap. That's the gap between what is expected or potentially could be collected and what is collected. Asking Rebecca Paul to start off, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just start firstly by declaring that I'm a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Scotland, and I'm also a member of the Chartered Institute of Taxation. Total revenues increased by 29.4 billion compared with 2022-23, and this was largely driven by growth in revenue from income tax, reflecting the continued freezing of tax bands and thresholds, and also corporation tax, where the tax rate increased. And this is to Sir Jim. What impact is the current freezing of tax bands and thresholds having on the volume and complexity of taxpayer affairs that HMRC is having to deal with?
Yes, so the freezing and in some cases reduction of thresholds and allowances across the tax system mean that the number of taxpayers in the income tax system is increasing all the time. So we think it's increased, I think, by about £3 million people over the last couple of years. And also more taxpayers are in what we would regard as sort of complex parts of the tax system for them to deal with. So they're involved with higher rates, or they may have more involvement with capital gains tax, for example. That does two things. I mean, first of all, it means that the underlying pressure on customer contact that Myrtle and her organisation have to deal with is upward. And whilst we are implementing measures that reduce that contact, obviously we've got to absorb that increase and then to make actual real reductions in contact levels. And that is partly because of the sheer increase in the customer base, but also because of some of the nature of some of the people who are coming into the tax system for the first time who are unfamiliar with it. So, for example, more state pensioners having to deal with the tax system than previously. The other impact that it has is it also affects our compliance work, because the Office of Budget Responsibility would expect that in order for us to maintain the tax gap, we would have to do more compliance work because of the increased customer base, even though a large proportion of them are probably in fairly compliant parts of the tax system where tax is deducted, for example, from their income. So it has an upward pressure on our operational services that we have to manage.
And you mentioned pensioners, actually, and I think that's a really good example. And just to sort of bring this to life, can you talk through what this actually means in practical terms when a pensioner is brought into paying tax, in terms of the additional work that HMRC has to do?
So the state pension has always been a taxable source of income, but obviously a combination of the frozen tax allowances and the triple lock mean that more and more state pensioners find that their total income is large enough to be subject to income tax. If they have another source of income, for example a job or a private pension, then we will try to collect the taxes due on their state pension by adjusting the tax code that applies to that other income. If they don't have enough other income for us to do that and we have to ask them to make a payment, then provided we think we've got all the information we need, we will not ask them to complete a self-assessment tax return. Instead, we will simply send them a bill, what we call a simple assessment. So we try to minimise the extent to which the state pensioners have to engage with the self-assessment tax system. But obviously, as they come onto the tax system for the first time, when they receive those bills from us, that can come as a surprise to them. It's not something that they've experienced before, and therefore it can generate contact with us to query what it is, or if they're worried about payment. So, I guess people will become more familiar with that over time, but as more and more come in, that is sort of frictional contact that we receive.
Yeah, I mean, this feels like quite a challenge for HMRC actually, in terms of because all of these things add up, don't they? So do you have the resources to cope with this increasing number of taxpayers?
So it's one of the reasons for the pressure on our customer services in the last couple of years. So whilst we have been introducing, for example, digital services and improved guidance and communications to reduce the level of contact that we receive, we have not reduced it by as much as we would have wanted, and in part that is because of the underlying upward pressure of new customers coming in who are more likely to have a sort of frictional engagement with the tax system and therefore contact us. And that's why, one of the reasons why our customer service levels have been below where we want them to be. Having said that, we have succeeded in reducing contact overall, and we continue to do so. And in the current financial year, the government in our supplementary estimate has given us additional funding, which Myrtle has used to put more advisors on the helplines. And I'm pleased to say that in the second half of this financial year, we have turned around the low service levels, and we're now hitting our service standards and expect to hit them throughout the remainder of this year.
Thank you. So I'm now just going to move on to the tax gap specifically. So HMRC estimates that the tax gap, so the difference between the amount of tax that should be paid to HMRC and what was actually paid, has increased from 38.1 billion to 39.8 billion. Now, obviously, there's been an announcement to try and address closing that gap. So 5,000 compliance staff are going to be focused on that. Can you talk us through exactly what they're going to be working on in order to close that gap and what you expect the impact to be?
Yes, so first of all, I should say you mentioned previously that tax receipts have increased significantly, and so the increase in the absolute value of the tax gap is simply a product of that. In percentage terms, we believe it has gone down slightly, and has gone down significantly since 2005-06, pretty much flatlined in recent years, but so there's not been a percentage increase. But you're right, the government has announced that it is giving us additional resources, and there's to tackle the tax gap, bring in more revenues and reduce it further. And the Red Book of Budget sets out the measures that the government is taking, both in terms of closing loopholes and giving us additional resources and investment, and the amount of extra revenues that is forecast to bring in. And the Office of Budget Responsibility have certified that by 29-30 that should be bringing in roughly £6.5 billion additional tax revenues. In terms of our staffing, what that is funding gives us is 5,000 additional frontline compliance officers, plus 1,800 debt management officers in Myrtle as part of the department. And that is, I think, £1.6 billion cost over 5 years, and we expect that element to bring in £4.7 billion by 29-30.
And so what will their focus be there? Because obviously closing loopholes is incredibly difficult, more difficult than I think people tend to realise, but obviously helping the taxpayer not make errors, sort of preventing problems before they arise, is something that is easier to do. So will these 5,000 compliance staff be largely focused on trying to help taxpayers avoid making errors?
Yes, so our compliance strategy we call prevent, promote, respond. So that's a sort of hierarchy of preference of activity. So we want to prevent people from making mistakes or from committing fraud, and that it means putting in place processes that prevent them from doing that, making sure we detect it before it happens and step in. Then it's promotion, so sort of encouraging people to be careful about their tax affairs and to have a compliant attitude towards it. But then finally respond, so where people do make mistakes or do avoid or evade tax, that we step in and respond and correct it and collect the tax that they should have paid that they have not paid. And so the compliance resources that I'm given, we're able to deploy across that strategy according to where we think we'll get the best return. We internally target ourselves to increase the amount of the yield that we get is from those upstream activities, so prevent and promote, and we can deploy our officers on that if we wish. Inevitably, the 5,000 extra staff that we bring in over the next 5 years will generally, a small number of them will likely be experienced, already qualified tax professionals, but most of them will be entry-level who we will have to train and mentor and deploy. So the type of work that they will be able to do will evolve over time, but will start off with being, relatively simple cases.
Thank you. And so in terms of measuring success, how are you going to do that? Are you going to sort of set some very specific targets and then measure against those? And is that something we would expect to see at some point?
Yes, so we are set annually a compliance yield target that we are expected to achieve from the resources that we've been given, and the Office of Budget Responsibility certifies what compliance yield it would expect us to produce in order to maintain the tax gap, prevent the tax gap from growing, and also deliver any extra revenues that the government has scored on its budget scorecard. So that's how our compliance yield target gets set, and then we report against that, and we report what our compliance yield is. As I mentioned, in the Red Book, the totality of the measures here that the government announced is expected to bring in roughly £6.5 billion additional tax revenues by 2030. That will be translated into a compliance yield target for HMRC, and then we will be tracked whether we hit that. And the Office of Budget Responsibility will also track whether we are spending the funding that we've been given and deploying the resources that we've said we would. Last year we achieved I think it was 41, just over 41 billion pounds. I think it was, 41.8 billion pounds in compliance yield. That's a record level and exceeded our target for the year.
No, thank you. And I think the reason I'm sort of asking about the measurement piece, because I think it's going to be really key that you obviously make sure that the balance is got right as well. So, I mean, when I was looking at the accounts, I can see when we look at sort of statutory reviews of automated penalties and default surcharges, it's quite a low percentage. So 2023-24, it's only 26% of HMRC original decisions were upheld on that. So I think as we're bringing more staffing, it's really important that you're going to be measuring exactly what they're focusing on and delivering, make sure they're going after the right things in order that you're not actually creating more work, essentially, without a favourable outcome.
I agree. If I can just explain on the reviews of penalties, there are two different categories of penalties. So there are penalties for filing your return late or making a payment late, which are automated. And at the point when we charge those penalties, we know that the return is late, but we don't know at that point whether the taxpayer has a reasonable excuse, and therefore they have a right to ask us to review the penalty. And we will cancel it if we are satisfied that there's a good reason why they were late. And that's why you see a high cancellation rate for those. The other group of penalties are applied by our officers as part of their compliance work, say because they find that you underdeclared your income in your tax return. Those are, done case by case and are considered by the compliance officer and are usually agreed with the taxpayer as part of the settlement of the case. And there's a very low sort of cancellation rate on those.
Oh, thank you for that. That's really helpful. So just moving on slightly, so the proportion of the tax gap made up by small businesses has increased every year from 37% to 60%. That's from 2017-18 to 2022-23. I'm just really interested to get your perspective really on what you think is causing that and what can be done to try and reverse that trend.
Yes, it's the most stubborn part of the tax gap. So whilst we have succeeded in reducing the tax gap, you can see that it's parts of it other than the small business gap that have reduced, and therefore proportionately small businesses now represent a much larger proportion of the tax gap than they did in the past. tackling that through sort of traditional compliance casework is quite challenging, because the value in each individual case there are a very large number of cases, each often with a relatively small value. So having the level of coverage that makes a real impact on that is challenging. And there's also a fairly high churn rate amongst the self-employed. So, if you look over a 5-year period, a lot of small businesses will have closed and new small businesses will have opened. So work that you have done to get a small business compliant, often that's kind of then lost, which is one of the reasons why we've been introducing Making Tax Digital, because that is a sort of mass approach to encouraging small businesses to get things right and prevent them from getting it wrong, and can have that impact without having to work them case by case. But I would expect a large proportion of the work that the 5,000 additional compliance officers do over the next 5 years will be in the small business part of the tax gap, and we will have a greater coverage of that than we've had recently.
Thank you.
So,
I was just going to do the last question. Is that okay?
okay, right.
So you mentioned the 6.5 billion in terms of the reduction that you're trying to secure. Just wondered how confident you are about delivering that, and also if you could just talk a little bit as well in terms of the tax gap, given that's a really important measure, and there is some subjectivity around some of the assumptions that will go into how you calculate that, in terms of, for example, differences in interpretation of tax rules, between the taxpayer and HMRC. And how do you ensure that you've got that independence piece there, so that you're comfortable that the tax gap is set at the right level and you're measuring everything appropriately?
Okay, so picking up the first one, how confident are we that we can deliver it? So I am confident that the additional funding we have been given should enable us to achieve that outcome, and indeed the Office of Budget Responsibility has certified it on that, on the basis that they are comfortable as well. So we have the funds that we need. It is an achievable target with the funds that we've got, but obviously we have to be completely on the ball in spending that money effectively and wisely, recruiting the people, training them and professionalising them and deploying them effectively, and that is no small task. So I would not suggest that it is easy to do. The 5,000 additional compliance officers is on top of the recruitment we would already have been doing just to maintain our workforce, so it's probably more like 12,500 people that we need to recruit and train and deploy. The scale and the nature of that task is not small, but we believe it is achievable. On the measurement of the tax gap, we have published a detailed methodology for how that is measured, and it is subject to regulation by the Statistical Regulatory Authority, for example, so we are confident that it follows best practice. It has also been reviewed both internationally and domestically, and is found to meet best practice. But you're right, it involves estimation and judgment, and parts of it are more certain than others, and we do in our methodology describe our sort of degree of certainty and confidence we have in the different aspects of it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks. Lloyd Hatton's got a supplementary.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, as we've established, the tax gap, the difference between the amount of tax that should be paid and what is actually paid, does sit at a large sum of just shy of £40 billion. So I'm a little bit concerned, Sir Jim, that the language that you used today was around flatlining and also around maintaining it. I think I know my constituents want to see that number reduced. It is a significant sum of what would be public money. So could you just, in the simplest possible terms, tell us what actually is the target to get it down, not to simply maintain it, and when are you going to hit that target?
Thank you. I should clarify that. So it's in the nature of our the discussions we have with the Office of Budget Responsibility. So first of all, when they forecast how much revenues the government will receive, they have to make an assumption about what the tax gap will be. So they start from a position of, okay, will you be able to prevent it from growing? Have you got enough resources to do that? Then, if the government gives us resources to do better than that, that can get scored as additional tax revenues. So the extra £6.5 billion is focused on reducing the tax gap, not just maintaining it. So maintaining it is a starting point in the sort of build of the resources that we need for the OBR to be satisfied. So we do not target ourselves to reduce the tax gap because it's not practical to do so. First of all, it doesn't get measured until more than a year after the end of the tax year, and then is subject to revisions as more data becomes available. So,
forgive me for interrupting, Sir Jim, but £39.8 billion is sort of the equivalent of our MOJ and the Department for Transport budget combined.
Yes.
So would it not be more helpful if there was a clearer aspiration for how much it is going to be reduced by rather than maintained by, and when you're going to hit these targets? That would be, I think, really helpful for me and I hope for the rest of the committee.
Yes, we don't have an aspiration to maintain it, we have an aspiration to reduce it, and we have significantly reduced it over the years. If you look back, say, from 2005-06 until now, it has reduced, I think, from 7.5% to 4.8%. So it is definitely not our aspiration to just maintain it. Indeed, frankly, the whole purpose of HMRC is to collect all of those revenues, so we want it to be at a minimum. But when it comes to operational targets that I can sort of deploy the department against and measure my performance against, the tax gap is a long-term measure that tells you whether we are doing the right things. But in the short term, we have to have different operational targets. It's not easy for me to manage the department against a target for the tax gap this year because I won't know for some considerable time what the tax gap actually is. What we do with the Office of Budget Responsibility is we convert into a compliance yield target the amount of compliance yield that they believe we would have to recover in order to prevent the tax gap from growing and achieve the additional tax revenues that we have been resourced to deliver. So the operational target that I pursue is that annual compliance yield target. If I deliver it, that should reduce the tax gap, and we should see that in the measurement of the tax gap as it becomes available.
If I may, Chair, just one quick follow-up. I'll be brief. Thank you for that. I mean, I still think we could be a lot more ambitious, but to understand how we close the tax gap, do we not also need to understand a bit more about the offshore tax gap? So do you agree, Sir Jim, that to close the tax gap altogether, we need to know how much is held in an offshore tax haven? And are you able to give me any vague estimate of the offshore tax gap? And then also a little bit of detail about what you're doing to go after non-compliance when it involves a tax haven?
Yes, so the tax gap that we estimate that we publish is comprehensive, so it includes the element of non-compliance relating to offshore income or assets. We have just recently isolated the element of the tax gap that we believe relates to that, and we've published their experimental statistics or statistics in development about the proportion of the tax gap that comes from foreign income. In recent years, we've had automatic exchange of information with other jurisdictions, so they report to us certain types of income that people they believe are resident in the UK are receiving. We can check that against what those people are declaring to us, and the difference obviously is that tax gap. And on the 24th of October this year, we published those experimental statistics for the first time, and they showed that 4% of the UK residents that we had received that information on had either not declared or under-declared tax on that foreign income. That's in the year 2018-19, and that in absolute terms was about £250 million. So that is not a complete measure of the offshore tax gap because it only relates to the types of data that we currently get from foreign.
So is your current estimate that it's just £250 million?
That's the best estimate we've come up with. We can come up with.
Think it's accurate?
It is uncertain.
It's incredibly small to me.
Well, it is uncertain. First of all, it's only one aspect of the offshore tax gap, but it is based on the information that we have, and it is a start that we have been able to isolate the.
You worry then that you don't have anywhere near enough the sufficient information required to have any idea what an accurate estimate of the offshore tax gap would be?
I think significant advances have been made in recent years of obtaining information from foreign fiscs, and for them obtaining information from the UK reciprocally about the foreign income of our taxpayers. That improves our ability to both monitor and tackle the tax gap, but it is incomplete.
But a figure as tiny as that, you can't help but walk away thinking that your estimates aren't based on accurate information.
Well, with respect, we are giving the best statistical estimate we can with the evidence we have. We have published the methodology for how we do that. They are official statistics. The reality is the tax gap is made up of a whole range of different behaviours and attributes. People hiding income or assets offshore is one of them. There has until now been no official estimate of how much that is, and we are building that.
Right. Well, I think we may well come back as a committee to that particular issue in due course. In the meantime, we need to move on, Sarah Olney, and just to say to members and witnesses, it's taken us quite a long time to get to the first three questions. We have other important matters to consider, so can we just bear that in mind in terms of time we're taking? Sarah Olney.
Thank you, Chair. But just very quickly on the tax gap, what level of reduction do you think HMRC would regard as a success?
I mean, I want there to be no tax gap at all.
Glad to hear you say that.
HMRC exists to collect all the tax that is due. We believe the tax gap in the UK is low by international standards. We're one of very few countries that have a comprehensive estimate of it. And we have successfully reduced it in recent years, but we know there is more that we can do with investment and with resources, which is why we've been given the extra resources in the budget, and there is definitely more beyond that we could do.
So moving on to the related issue of the compliance yield, then obviously you've exceeded your target for the past year in the report and accounts, so 42 billion compared to your target of 40.5 billion. Do you think that HMRC will be able to sustain the increase in compliance yield over the next few years? Can we expect to see more target busting performance?
I expect that in the current year we will achieve more compliance yield than we did last year as well. So we will, even though that was a record level, I believe that we will beat it this year. But our target this year is significantly increased. It's 45.5 billion. That is achievable, but it is really stretching, which is what you would want from a target, I guess. So, I am hopeful that we will achieve that target, but I am confident certainly that we will achieve even higher compliance yield than last year. The big challenge for us going forward is making the most of the investment that we've been given in the budget, both in changing our systems, but also in deploying the additional resources. That is challenging because you have to take experienced compliance officers off the front line to train and mentor those additional staff. You get payback later on, but we've got to make sure that it doesn't depress our performance in the meantime.
Can I just ask you about how you've achieved that increase in compliance yield? So there's, according to the report, there's an increasing focus on the upstream compliance, but that has led, according to the numbers in your report, to a decrease in the number of prosecutions. So there were 344 prosecutions in 23-24, which compares to 691 in 2019-20 before the pandemic. You've said that there are delays, and we all know this, in the criminal justice system. But how is it that you have improved your compliance yield when the number of prosecutions has fallen so much?
Well, I think prosecutions are not necessarily the best way in all cases of getting the yield. So our approach to using criminal investigation is, whilst we reserve the right to use it in any case of deliberate evasion, we use it for the most serious cases where we believe it is necessary and where it will have the right impact. And our deliberate strategy in recent years on the use of our fraud investigation service has been to use it in higher value cases. So although you will see a smaller number of cases and a smaller number of investigations and prosecutions, actually the average value per case is significantly higher, and the yield that we're getting from the fraud investigation service is therefore holding up or better despite the reduced caseload, because that is the strategy. That doesn't mean that we don't work the other cases, but it means that we don't use criminal investigation as the means of tackling.
Yeah. Is there not a danger, though, that in the lower value cases, that failing to prosecute some of the criminal behaviour, it reduces that deterrent effect and perhaps leads to a culture almost of non-compliance because people don't think that they're going to be pursued?
Yeah, so, I mean, first of all, I think that is a risk. and there is very limited evidence about what the deterrent effect of criminal investigation and prosecution is, and we are currently doing a sort of search of the academic work and trying to get the best possible answer on what the deterrent effect is. I would obviously point out that when we use civil processes, there can still be significant sanctions, so we do charge penalties for deliberate evasion. We will name people who have been involved in serious deliberate evasion. We also have other sanctions available to us, like account freezing. So criminal conviction is not the only kind of painful sanction that you can apply for deliberate evasion. But you are right, we do need better insight into what the deterrent effect of criminal investigation and prosecution is than we currently have.
So I note in the report that 14 billion of that 42 billion compliance yield is coming from upstream compliance, which is sort of better managing people's tax affairs before they get to a kind of a non-compliant phase. But a lot of that accounting is sort of based on estimates, and it's a little bit uncertain. Can you talk us through a little bit more how you've arrived at that 14 billion, how you can be certain that you have achieved that compliance yield?
Yes, and I might bring Justin in to explain sort of how it gets certified and validated. So there are different elements of what we call upstream yield. So first of all, if we stop a fraudulent repayment claim before it is repaid and prevent the payment going out, that is an upstream compliance. That is absolutely, you can see the figure on a form that we have frustrated. We also score where we believe through one-to-many communications with people to say, please check your affairs and amend them if they're wrong, because we see some risks. If they then make an amendment, we will score that because we have prompted it. But also we score the deterrent effect of our downstream response works. We know, we can monitor that when we investigate someone and correct their past non-compliance, we actually see better compliance in subsequent years. So there's a future effect as well as a retrospective effect from our work, and we score that. We've got sort of quite careful and quite conservative ways of measuring that and scoring it, and they are subject to certification.
So there's two routes whereby things are reviewed: product and process yield, which is the product of change in how we do things, or the change in policy, is certified by the Office for Budget Responsibility. Operational upstream yield is internally reviewed extensively and is subject to occasional review by internal audit and also by the National Audit Office.
Thank you. And then just finally, of the additional compliance staff that you're recruiting, will they be primarily deployed in upstream compliance activities, or perhaps more focused on prosecutions?
It's for my Director General for Compliance to deploy them to best effect, so there's no rules about what they will be used for. The new staff will, however, generally be entry-level people who will need to be trained and deployed, and so they will initially be put largely on respond investigation on small businesses. Some of the 5,000 will be graduate entrant recruits who, when they are trained, will be deployed more on large businesses, for example. And there will be a very small number of already experienced tax professionals that we'll be able to attract into the department. But obviously, over time, as those people become more professionalised, how we deploy them may change.
Thank you. Moving on to the level of debt. Tax debt's now at 43 billion, which is less than a year ago, but it's still very much higher than it was before the pandemic. And I just wondered if you've got anything to say about why it continues to be so high, and when might we start to see a significant reduction?
Yes, so our debt balance reached record levels, obviously, during the pandemic, and that was partly as a result of government policy, because there was forgiveness for late payment of tax, also partly as a result of certain enforcement actions were not available to us, and there was a moratorium on insolvencies, for example. That has reduced significantly, but we are still seeing really very high levels of new debt coming into the system, much higher than we'd have seen previously. That's largely small businesses, and we believe it is largely sort of it's cash flow issues in small businesses. But that is adding pressure to us. The debt balance is obviously a product of new debt less the debt that we resolve. So we need to do two things. We need to try and depress the extent to which new debt arises, but we also need to increase the extent to which we resolve that debt, and that's why, for example, there are 1,800 additional staff being given to us for debt collection over the next 5 years in the budget.
And can you just give me a sense of how those staff are going to be deployed to help you manage that? Because we see also that, or perhaps Mr. Holliday can.
Pass to Myrtle, because they're part of Myrtle's organisation.
Sorry.
So in the main, they will be on our debt helpline and chasing up customers on the various on self-assessment, PAYE, corporation tax and VAT debts. In the main, there will be a small amount of them that will be put onto our enforcement activities as well.
Thank you. One of the things that's clear in the report is that of the debt balance is becoming progressively more aged. Do you have any specific approaches to try and tackle some of the older debt?
So one of the reasons for the additional headcount is for us to get to the debt before it ages. We're also in the budget settlement. We've got investment into getting better data from credit reference agencies and better customer insight, so we can tailor our interventions based on the customer behaviour and the customer group, and we would look to deploy those to have much more tailored interventions on some of the older debts.
So I suppose to summarise, your approach is going to be to ensure that the new debt doesn't become aged, exactly, as opposed to having a new approach to collecting aged debt. And Mr. Holliday, I see that the amount of debt written off increased from 3.2 billion in 22-23 to 5 billion in 23-24, which is obviously a significant increase. Are you expecting a large amount of debt write-off in the current financial year?
I would. So I think we were on the record in this setting in saying that we thought the level of losses, which is write-offs and remittances, for the past few years has been lower than normal and lower than we would expect, and part of that is a product of the delays in the courts and the moratorium on insolvency. Most of our write-offs are because the taxpayer has become insolvent.
So this is kind of the COVID interruption
there's
and impact sort of still working out.
Yeah, there's still a bit of that working through. So yeah. I would expect this year's tax losses to be a bit higher than last year. I think there is still that to be worked. That does still need that bow wave. Whatever the opposite of a bow wave is, needs to work through the system. In terms of, and it's also worth saying that there's a gap between the recognition of that in the tax gap statistics and in the actual write-off. So we have statistical colleagues have, in estimating the tax gap, anticipated already some of that write-off. So that's not going to add to the tax gap.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Moving on to the issue of corporation tax, Lloyd.
Thank you. Just before I do that, just one very quick question on something that Sarah rightly raised. I mean, those numbers are quite appalling reading, collapsing from 691 investigations down to 344. So just two really quick questions. One, why are you not using all the extra resources that you've already told us you've got to increase the number of criminal prosecutions? And two, and I think particularly our constituents would want to know the answer to this, why is it that the HMRC is seemingly incapable of investigating those who are likely deliberately avoiding tax?
My objective is to reduce the tax gap, not to increase prosecutions. So we use prosecutions when that is the most effective way of reducing the tax gap. We are very successful in our criminal investigation. We've got a very high conviction rate from our prosecutions, but criminal investigations are very resource intensive. They, it takes a lot of resources to do one criminal investigation that could do several.
Need a tough deterrent, surely. People will get away with avoiding tax if they don't think anyone's going to come after them. And if the numbers have collapsed drastically from 691 to 344, the deterrent disappears altogether.
Well, it's frankly an article of belief. Whether you think that increasing prosecutions from 300 odd to 600 odd will actually have a deterrent effect on evasion. As I said, there is very little evidence for it. We use criminal investigation where we think it is the best way of reducing the tax gap. We tend to use it for the more serious cases. That may be people who have, deliberately hidden information from us. It may be professional people who we need to make an example that we cannot engage with professionals in that way. But the mass use of prosecutions, in our experience, is not the most effective way of using our resources to reduce the tax gap. So it depends what you think success looks like for the department. If you think success looks like having more convictions for crime, then that is something we could do, but our experience is that it's not what would reduce the tax gap.
If I could, I think there's a lot of people across the country who would question that reasoning and would want to see those who deliberately avoid tax facing a prosecution. If I might move on, though, to the impact of policy changes around corporation tax, research and development relief schemes, I think I have sort of two key questions that I'd like to understand a bit more about from you, please, Sir Jim, which is, can you give us some sort of concrete evidence that these policy changes around relief schemes are actually providing value for money? What work has HMRC done to ensure that they are actually providing good value for money for the taxpayer?
So R&D tax relief obviously is a very important tax relief which successive governments have put a lot of funding into, because they are to stimulate innovation, but it is important that they are used for the purpose that they're intended and not used for others. And we know that the level of error and fraud in R&D release has been extraordinarily high, much higher than the tax gap generally, and that is why a large number of measures have been taken to reduce that. The balancing act that I have to achieve is using those effectively to prevent ineligible claims from getting through, whilst enabling people who are making legitimate claims to get their relief as quickly as they possibly can, because that's how we achieve the policy objective. We think that in 21-22, error and fraud peaked at around 17.6%, but as a result of the measures that have been taken, we now expect that error and fraud in 23-24 will be about 7.8%. That is our best
Explain
estimate.
in a bit more detail, please, Jim, how you reached that estimate of 17.6%.
So we use what we call a mandatory random inquiry programme. So we take a random sample of claims and we investigate them, and we can extrapolate from that. And it gives us a sort of statistically valid way of coming up with an estimate. And that when we started introducing that identified that the level of error and fraud in R&D was higher than we had previously thought it was. So that is quite a well-established way of measuring.
That's quite a worrying statistic. It suggests that fraud and error is quite commonplace when it comes to these relief schemes. So going back to my first question, do you think there is concrete evidence? I'd be really interested to know what you think, that it is providing good value for money, or actually does this relief scheme, much like many other relief schemes, provide poor value for money and actually open up sort of a big space for fraud and for error?
Yeah, so obviously error and fraud is not the only aspect that might make a relief not value for money. There has been evidence published in the past that shows the effect of R&D relief in stimulating R&D in the economy, which is something that governments have wanted to see because they believe that it helps with economic growth. And that shows that it has a positive effect, less so on the small business relief than on the RDEC, and you have seen policy change over the years to adjust to reflect where the value is in the relief. But error and fraud is also another aspect that could affect the value for money of the relief, and that's why there's been a determined effort in recent years to reduce it significantly and bring it within, within reasonable bounds. It'll still be the figure that we've estimated, the best figure that we've estimated for 23-24, 7.8%, shows significant progress, but it is still much too high.
So my final question, very short question, so it'd be good to have a very short answer. Do you think these relief schemes provide good value for money for the British taxpayer?
Yes, there is evidence that they are effective in stimulating R&D, which is what the policy objective is, so they do achieve their policy objective.
Thank you.
Sarah Alder's got a follow-up on that.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I've been contacted by a business in my constituency about R&D tax reliefs. They have told me that because HMRC changed the classification of their business once they applied for R&D tax credits, it was then rejected. They've had enormous difficulty then engaging with HMRC to discuss the matter. The case was opened in 2022, and then the whole kind of discussion and then an appeal process. They are now advised that it should conclude sometime next month. In the meantime, there's a grave danger that this innovative software firm is going to become unviable. I just wondered, Sir Jim, if you could just comment on whether this is a problem that you're seeing, that there are businesses out there that are finding themselves now ineligible for R&D tax credits, and due to the time it's taking to resolve queries and appeals, that businesses are going out of business as a result.
It's very much not what we want to see, and obviously I'll be happy to look at your constituent's case, but it reflects the challenge that we face in making sure that people who've got eligible claims receive their relief as quickly as possible, whilst protecting the scheme from what has been an extraordinarily high level of error and fraud, and that is a really difficult balancing act to achieve, and I think we are doing our best to make sure we sort the sheep from the goats as we do that, and we've been improving our risk assessment. One issue in the past was that we got very little information with these claims, so it was very hard for us to distinguish which ones were risky, but one of the policy changes that has been introduced is that much more information has to be supplied to us, and so we can improve our strike rate, if you like, and reduce the impact on legitimate claimants from our inquiries.
Thank you very much. I'm going to write to you about this particular case, if that's okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
And actually, I've got a particular case I will write to you about. I think we've all got these, haven't we? It's a job of being the constituency MP. The constituent whose business has been going to be closed down by your winding up order, 80 jobs to be lost just before Christmas. They say they have a payment plan that you won't accept, and the feeling is from their tax advisor that generally HMRC is getting much more aggressive about trying to simply collect tax at any cost. Is that a fair description?
Certainly. If it's a time to pay plan, we have a time to pay policy, which means that if you can't afford to pay your tax on time, we do not want to take enforcement action against you or insolvency action. We want to give you an affordable payment plan. But you must obviously pay what you can afford, and you must show that you are going to reduce your tax debt over time. But it is very much our policy to encourage debtors to enter into a time to pay plan.
Can I write to you about that one?
Please
That's
do.
the best way to do it. Thank you. Right, just very quickly to Justin Holliday. The child benefit payments has been an increased estimate for you of the error and fraud in the child benefit payment system for 23-24. Could you tell us why that is? Is it just a methodological change that has caused that estimate to increase? And how have you responded to that information? Just briefly respond to that, please.
We are confident that the underlying level of error and fraud on child benefit hasn't increased, but and as you correctly say, Chair, we have changed the methodology to better measure it. There are two big causes of error and fraud on child benefit. The first one is legitimate claimants moving overseas, and the second one is people leaving full-time non-advanced education between the ages of 16 and 19. What we are doing in response to that is working better with the Home Office in the case of immigration, or emigration rather, and working better with the Department for Education in the case of people leaving school to try and get better data, leaving education settings, to try and get better data to feed into our risking and feed into our compliance response.
So we should see better figures by next year, should we?
I think they will move down slowly. I wouldn't want to bet on it going down next year, but it should be moving down over time.
I think we might be coming back to ask questions if it doesn't.
Understood.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Moving on to the very important issue of improving customer service. So I think the committee was very critical previously about the failure of HMRC's customer service. And of the 7 indicators that you use, 5 have got specific targets, and the information we have for the last 2 years, 22, 23, 23, 24, you haven't hit one of the targets. It's not great, is it?
No, I mean, it's certainly not the level of service that we have wanted to give. I've explained some of the pressures on us that have resulted in that, and some of the steps that we've taken to improve that. I mean, if I talk about where we are in this year, the poor levels of service continued in the first half of this financial year, but are now significantly better. And we expect...
From when?
From in the second half of the year, so really from the 1st of October, for example, we've been hitting our telephony target of dealing with 85% of advisor attempts, and we expect to sustain that throughout the remainder of this year, and with the resources that we've been given for 25-26 for next year.
It's not a very long period, is it, from the 1st of October?
No,
compared with the failures for a long period of time.
We were given additional resources earlier this year, additional funding, and we have seen, as a result, we've seen service levels improving over the summer to the point where in the second half of the year we are now on our service standards with those additional resources.
Right, so we'll come on to look at the telephony issues, I think, which are really serious, because they frustrate people, I think, more than anything else when you can't get through on the phone and wait for ages, particularly when phone lines are just shut down. You give up, you go away, and people are left out there not knowing what's going on. That's just not acceptable, is it?
Well, we experimented with 2 pilots in 2023 of what would be the effect if we temporarily closed helplines, because we believe that a significant proportion of the contact that we receive is avoidable, and that customers could actually self-serve online, and that is our preference, that customers try to do that before they contact us. So we did 2 small-scale pilots in 2023, which we evaluated, and we have published evaluations of those. We currently have no plans, however, to do any further helpline closures.
When someone's on the telephone and they suddenly find it doesn't get answered and they've got no way of contacting you, it doesn't feel like a small-scale pilot to them, does it?
Sorry, I was talking about the pilots that we introduced in 2023. They were for short periods in very specific areas. More generally, I agree that when we are not handling a large proportion of the calls that were coming through to us, I can understand that is very frustrating.
Or just shut the telephones line down altogether, as I understand it, for periods.
Well, that's the pilots that I talked about. Yes. In 2023. We ran 2 short pilots of what would happen if we didn't have the helplines, and instead if we directed customers to, well, in one of the pilots we said we want all customers to go online and use our web chat by preference. In the second one we said certain customers, the helpline is reserved for certain priority customers, for others we want you to go online, and those were testing whether we could shift the avoidable contact online and help customers to self-serve.
I think the assurance you've given us is that will not happen again.
There are no plans to close access to helplines.
Well, can we just say alter the no plans to it will not happen again?
Well, I can't give assurances for what people are going to do in the future. I can tell you there are no plans to do it again. However, it remains our strategy to be digital first. In other words, to encourage customers to try.
We'll come on to that particular issue. Yeah. Over to the issues of telephony problems.
Thank you very much, and I want to, Sir Jim, just talk a bit more about that. I just want a bit of clarity. The 2 pilots that you referred to, is that different to the fact that after 70 minutes people were being cut off from the phone lines?
I'll let Myrtle come in on what our sort of operational policies are for terminating calls, but yes, they are different.
So the 70-minute limiter is a technological limiter because at very busy times, if you've got loads of people waiting in excess of 70 minutes, then it brings the system down. But also, we've done customer research. While our customers are willing to hang on for a bit longer in order to get through to somebody to resolve their concern, beyond a certain time, they abandon anyway. But as of
but that's not. We're not talking about people getting fed up because they've been on the phone for so long that they can't get through. What I'm just absolutely want clarity on is the 2 pilots that Sir Jim has referenced, which we are left with the impression is not being pursued as an idea, is different from the fact that in 2022-23, almost 7,000 calls were cut off.
Yes, and that
after 70 minutes.
If you're talking about the 70 minutes, so as Jim had said, we were in a position where, with more taxpayers in the system, with having to absorb the inflationary cost, we didn't have enough people to answer all of the phone calls.
So it's a decision that HMRC has made. It's a customer service decision to cut off the phone calls, as opposed to your technology not being sufficient enough to be able to keep people on hold.
Yeah. Well, at 70 minutes, we put it technologically, because if you have loads and loads of people entering the queue, then you reach a limit in the technology and the system starts slowing down and not performing.
And do you think being cut off after waiting for 70 minutes is good or bad customer service?
It's not ideal, but I can assure you that as of us having reached our service standards, we don't have people reaching those thresholds.
When I speak to residents and constituents in my area who tell me they wait for hours to get through, they don't use the word "it's not ideal", they say it's appalling. More frustratingly, and you will recognise this, I'm sure, because you have had feedback, I'm sure, from those who are trying to access the services, they are particularly frustrated that they are given no warning before the 70 minutes that their phone call will be cut off. Do you recognise that is poor customer service?
That is not ideal customer service, and I'm sorry for that. And that is a feature of when we had fewer people, to answer the phone calls. We are now resourced to meet our service standards, and instances of the 70-minute cut-off only occur if we've got an IT failure or such like, and we've got loads and loads of people in the queue. But what we are constantly, we're constantly revising and reviewing our interactive voice response. And on certain lines, we give people a sense of how long they would need to wait to get their calls answered.
Can I just a bit further on that, because it's the technological pressure that might exist if there are too many people in the queue. There are different times of the year where that may be more likely than not. So I'm getting the sense that technological instruction, if you like, to your software hasn't changed. That is still the case. Well, will you be responding to the particular pressures on a particular month, for instance, so that you are less likely to reach that threshold?
So we have a good understanding of the peaks and troughs of activities in our business cycle. So we resource to meet the peaks and the troughs, and we're resourced to meet the service levels that we have published. So when we are at our service levels, we don't have instances of people reaching that 70-minute wait time.
I just want to very quickly touch on something. Nestle's making such an important point here. I mean, it's nearly 40,000 calls were cut off after being forced to wait 70 minutes. It's not ideal, it's bloody awful. And why don't you warn these 40,000 people? Surely that would be a very simple thing that you could do. Why don't you warn them? And if you're not going to warn them, surely you must admit, Myrtle, that this is the clearest example that HMRC's telephone services are completely broken.
So we do let people know what is the average wait time on some of our bigger service lines.
Just if you go on 65 minutes, you go, by the way, in 5 minutes' time, if we haven't got back to you, we are going to hang up. Because people deserve to know. It's so frustrating. If you work, if you've got childcare, if you've got other responsibilities, it's a really, really appalling way to treat customers.
So that is something that we can review and see if it is possible for us to do that. However, it does. What we send a lot of messages about call wait times on the IVR. We also signpost people to the digital services, which in many instances they are highly, the satisfaction rates are really high. About 66% of our customers who come through to our phone lines could have done what they needed digitally, which is instant access, 24/7 access. So we would really encourage people to use our digital services where it's available and where they can.
This idea that people are hanging on for hours with HMRC just for the fun of it, when actually they could just go to digital services, is not quite the accurate picture, is it? People are struggling with the digital services, which is why they're turning to the telephone. There will be some instances, of course, where people can use digital, but actually a lot of people are not able to get what they want from digital, which is why they're phoning HMRC. And, I will just labour the point. Being on for hours and then being cut off is quite different to saying, okay, I've been on for 2 hours, I'll hang on a bit longer. But being cut off is not just bad customer service. It is an organisation that is deliberately, it seems, trying to put you off from being ever phoning HMRC again.
I would refute that. We do not deliberately degrade or want to make customers suffer, but we do have evidence that a lot, we've got 69% of our interactions are actually available by self-serve means. So what we absolutely do is encourage the customers who can go online to do so we can then free up the phone lines, because we absolutely recognise that not everybody can go online, and some of our services are not yet available online, and then we've got vulnerable customers as well. So if the 66% of the customers who phoned us last year, who could have gone and done simple things like, check their national insurance, reset their passwords, if they had gone online, then the customers who absolutely needed to call us would have had a better service.
Sounds a bit like you're blaming the customer.
We are absolutely not blaming the customer. We have a multi-channel, and what we're trying to do is make sure that the customer gets the best service in the channels that are available, so everybody gets a good service. So there's stuff that we're doing to make our digital services more visible. We've got a marketing campaign, and we're constantly tweaking our digital services based on customer feedback and user feedback. So what I'm asking for everybody is to use the most appropriate channel for the work that the transaction they're trying to execute, and everybody gets a better. So there is work on our part to continue to improve our service, to continue to expand our service, and to continue to make people more aware of our service. But I would also ask for people to come along with us on this journey.
Just very finally, Chair, what I'd say, Ms Lloyd, is I absolutely recognise there is a shift that has to happen in the way that customers interact with big organisations. When we have a year-on-year increase in the number of people that will be needing to interact with HMRC, of course the organisation needs to find better digital ways of supporting them so that they aren't just left on the phone. Organisations, public sector organisations, including, I have to say, local authorities, one of which I led for 6 years, face those exact challenges. I get it. But when things like being cut off after 70 minutes happens, it feels like HMRC is trying to force people to use digital instead of it being just a unintended consequence. So I wouldn't want our customers, our constituents, to feel that is them being pushed into something before the digital platform is appropriate and up to standard.
I can give you a categorical assurance that 70-minute cut-off is not the reason why we do it, and we're not driven by that motivation at all. But the simple fact is that in recent years we have not had sufficient resources to handle all of the contact that we receive, and therefore we have to try to reduce the avoidable contact by, for example, encouraging customers to do things online for themselves, and also try to prioritise the contact that we do deal with. And we have tried a whole variety of approaches to sort of get the optimum ways of doing that. When it comes to terminating calls, there is a practice in helpline industry, if you know that a customer is going to have to wait an unreasonable length of time, that you will terminate the call and say, we are very busy, call back, for example. We really do that very little because our customer research has told us that our customers would prefer to wait to try and get through to an advisor than be cut off and told to call back.
Why don't you warn them, Sir Jim? Why don't you warn people? Why don't you warn my constituents when they've been waiting in excess of an hour that this is going to happen, rather than doing it with no clear information?
On many of our helplines, we do warn what the average wait time is, but I take your point that in the cases where we are going to cut people off, that whether we can give them some advance notice in a recording before that. But our aim is that no one should get to that point, and currently the service levels that we're offering...
Over 40,000 customers did get to that point with no warning, and it's infuriating.
So I will take away that point. You've made it several times, so obviously I will pay heed. But the reality is what we want to do is offer a service where people do not have to wait that length of time, and where we have zero of those types of calls, or where it only happens on a day, for example, where an IT system has gone down.
A couple of quick follow-ups. Do you offer a callback service?
We don't routinely offer a callback service, so we intend to answer the calls as they come in and resolve the customers.
Why don't you offer a callback service?
I think that the technology platform that we have right now, so you're talking about where in some instances where people... In the IVR, you tell them, we'll call you back. Our technology platform does not allow us to do that.
Sorry.
Yes.
This technology platform is used by lots of organisations which achieve that and allow it.
Well, not our current platform does not allow us, but we are in the process of going into procurement for a new platform, and that will be part
of the new platform.
That will be part of our requirements.
Right. Can I just ask a question about cut-offs? Your offices close down at some point at the end of the day. If someone's on a call and they're waiting to be answered and you get to your office closing time, do you just cut the call off then?
No, we don't do that. We absolutely don't. So our office open times are from 8 o'clock to 6 o'clock, and every call entering the queue before 6 o'clock gets answered. And our colleagues will work over 6 p.m. to answer those calls.
Sarah Aldman.
Thank you, Chair. When people are able to get through, it has been found in sort of sampling of some of the customer calls that advisors have not fully complied with procedures in a third of the calls that were sampled, and that's obviously going to have a knock-on impact on customers' ability to get their taxes right. So, can you tell me first of all, Ms. Lloyd, why is that number so high, and does that not deeply concern you?
So I think we invest in the training of our colleagues. It's about a 4 to 5 week training and then a consolidation period after that. There was a point when we had a huge influx of new colleagues, temporary colleagues, and I think that the report that you're referring to and the sampling that you're referring to was at that point, and a lot of those colleagues were in their consolidation period and were not as efficient and had not gained the level of proficiency.
This is about accuracy.
Yes, they hadn't gained the level of proficiency and confidence of our more experienced colleagues.
Well, if they hadn't attained the required level of proficiency, why were they answering calls? So
there is a period of consolidation. So not everything is classroom-based. So they will do some classroom-based, some e-learning, and then they do some side-by-side monitoring of calls with experienced colleagues. And after the 4 to 5 weeks of training, they really become totally effective in about the 9-week period. So I'm speculating that would have been the period where we've had colleagues who perhaps were not as familiar with the system or as confident and were not able to answer some of the queries or gave incorrect information.
Well, when you found this worryingly high number of advisors not following correct procedures, did you not do some resampling to give yourself some comfort that the explanation you've just given is the reason why that was happening?
We carry out regular quality checks, accuracy checks, and we work on customer feedback as well, and we revisit our training, and we take colleagues back into the classroom training as well. We have had now a period of stability in some of the lines. We're applying the learnings from that feedback into our training packages, into our next tranche of training. So it is something that we're constantly monitoring on a daily, weekly and monthly basis, and making improvements as we go along.
So you're confident that this 34% will be reduced?
Yes.
In the next report?
Yes.
Well, we look forward to seeing that. Can you tell me, are you able to estimate what kind of impact these inaccuracies are having on the ability of taxpayers to get their taxes right?
So we look at a number of factors. So we look at procedural accuracy, we look at the financial accuracy, and we look at the quality of the calls. So in terms of the accuracy, the financial accuracy of whether our advice results in customers paying the right amount or bringing the right information, it's at about 97%. So it is fairly high. Okay,
but do you think there's an increased risk for those taxpayers who've been able to get through and then received the procedures have not been followed correctly, and then there's a risk they've received incorrect advice? Is there a risk for them that they're going to be paying fines or penalties for inaccurate returns?
We assess each case on its own merit, and if it is found that the taxpayer has received incorrect advice, then they would not be penalised.
Do you think you're able to say, without any reservations, that nobody has been penalised for getting their tax affairs wrong as a result of having received incorrect advice over the phone?
I mean, I can say there's no reason for that. I mean, first of all, I would say that whilst I know our wait times are often unacceptable to people when they get through to our advisors, the satisfaction rate with our advisors is very high, and customers are generally very pleased with the quality of the service that they get. And as Myrtle says, we monitor the accuracy of that. We record all of those calls. So if there is ever a case where a customer says, "Well, hang on, I was told by the advisor X," we can go back and review the recording. And I do see complaint cases where we acknowledge that we got it wrong, and that we give redress as necessary to the customer.
Thank you, Chair.
Your fortune.
Nothing from me at the moment, Chair. Nothing from me at the moment.
Right. Just moving on then to modernising the tax system. But before then, could I just pick up one additional point that you made, Myrtle, Lloyd, about the fact that customers on the phone lines were told about waiting times. Isn't that actually about waiting times that were the average for the previous day, not about the ones that are currently existing?
Yes, and that is the capability of our current technical platform.
How long has that failure been accepted? Because it's a pretty fundamental failure, isn't it? If I get on a telephone line and someone says, "Oh, the wait times are 20 minutes," and I think, okay. But actually, if that's yesterday and today's is 50 minutes, I might hang up straight away if I know that. So why is it taking so long to rectify that?
It is. I think that's what we have. That's the limitation of the technology platform we have. We could. It gives people a sense. While it might not be absolutely accurate and not exactly about today, it gives people a sense of what the wait times, the average wait times were the previous day. So it's better than nothing. It's not ideal.
This is like going into a restaurant to make a dinner reservation, and then the sort of maitre d' turning around and going, "Oh, we were absolutely jam-packed yesterday. You couldn't have found a free table for love nor money." Well, I'm not here yesterday. I'm here today to have dinner and make a reservation.
We have a certain.
And if they can do it, surely HMRC can do it.
We have a certain pattern of calls on a daily basis, and they're pretty much around the same at certain times of the day. So the pattern is fairly sort of the same over the 5
generic
days
information
week.
basically what you're saying. If it's in the morning, this is what it tends to be like in the morning. If it's in the afternoon, this is what it tends to be like in the afternoon.
Yes.
Which begs the question why you have any system at all if you already know how busy you're going to be in the mornings or the afternoons. So surely either you have an accurate system which tells people what the current demand is for the helpline right now live, or you don't have one at all. What we've got here is a kind of weird halfway house which does neither.
So I think we work on the basis, and the customers actually, we've seen customer behaviour where when they have seen that, they've either called back later or they've called back at a different time. And the customer feedback is they prefer to know something rather than nothing.
They don't know anything because you hang up on them after 70 minutes and you don't tell them they're going to do it, so they're left in the dark.
Yes, I accept you've made that point. We will look at the 70-minute, but we're talking about the average, giving people a sense of what the average wait time was the previous
I think we'll be
day.
looking for a very clear indication as to how and when all these failures in the system are going to be put right.
Chair, we will look at that, but we believe that within the restrictions of our current technology, giving customers an idea of the average wait time at the time of day when they're calling is helpful to them, and that is what the feedback.
I think we'll be looking for the intention, the plan as to when that's going to be improved. So you've got a service which most other organisations, most other call centres would deliver automatically now. Okay. Right, let's move on to digital, modernising the tax system. You've clearly flagged up that you are intent on making the organisation a digital-first organisation. Why is it taking so long to do it?
So I think, first of all, I think it's probably a never-ending process. Currently, roughly 70% of all of the interactions with HMRC are digital. It's virtually 100% in some parts of the tax system. So, for example, when employers are dealing with us on pay-as-you-earn, it's pretty much 100% of their filings are online. Similarly for corporation tax, VAT, but there are other areas that we are continuing to work on. So, for example, in 2023, we replaced a completely paper-based child benefit system with a digital one, and with investment we can do more. But the major parts of the tax system, customers can now deal with us digitally. The area obviously that is most difficult is where unrepresented individual taxpayers are dealing with us, but even there on self-assessment, something like 97% of self-assessment returns are now filed online using our digital services.
Right, so there are some successes, but clearly you've got some way to go in some areas. It seemed when we were discussing the telephone lines and issues around that, you felt that customers should just use the services, but they're not. So is there a failure by them not understanding, or by you as an organisation not properly explaining and offering the necessary support and advice that they need to use them?
Yes, so I think, first of all, there is some unawareness of the extent of our digital services, and we have done some research on that. We've currently got a campaign going on, which started on the 4th of November, to increase awareness of our digital services, particularly our mobile app. So to some extent, it is a lack of awareness. To some extent, I think it is also a lack of confidence, because tax can be complicated. We know that customers like reassurance. If I take the child benefit as an example, whilst we've now fully digitised that service, we're getting a fair bit of contact from customers saying, I've now done this online and now I'm contacting you to make sure it's all okay. Have I done that okay? And so we are also increasing the sort of digital communication with our customers. So in those cases, we are now sending SMS messages to claimants saying, thank you, we have received your claim, it is complete, we are processing it, all in order to reduce that avoidable contact. It also fits with the research that we've done about how our customers want to deal with us. So they, we know that 86% of our customers say they are willing to deal with us digitally or would prefer to do so. It also means, of course, that they can do it in a time that suits them rather than within our opening hours. So it both, I think, helps us to reduce the demand and enable us to deal with the priority callers, and helps our customers because it's in line with how they want to run their lives.
So have you got plans about how you can expand your services further in a particular time frame? Is there a clear plan with time limits and targets that you can show?
Yes, like all departments, we're going through a spending review process at the moment, where we are bidding for the investment that we think we need in the coming years, and in the spring we will be publishing a digital services roadmap setting out the activity that we'll be undertaking.
Right. Just in terms of what you do offer, one of the indications that we were given of a problem is that the customers can go and do a new VAT registration online, and they can be told, about length of times at the beginning, etc. But there isn't a way in which they can actually monitor the progress of that registration. Why not? Again, that's something that many organisations would offer now.
Yes, and our research shows that being able to offer that kind of service would reduce avoidable contact to us, and that is why I mentioned, for example, in relation to child benefit, we now have the automated SMS messages to customers to reassure them about where their claim is in the stage, but some of our digital services don't enable us to do that, so we often don't have the track your parcel type capability that some commercial organisations have.
And as part of the roadmap we're going to see shortly, that's going to be part of the roadmap, is it that sort of improvement in the service?
If it is something that will significantly reduce avoidable contact, then it'll be prioritised in our investment plans.
Don't you know by now whether it will?
Well, we don't know what investment we're going to get beyond 25-26. We certainly know the further digitisation that we want to undertake, and it is increasingly, as you mentioned, about improving existing services rather than extending them. Until fairly recently, it has really been about going into parts of the system that are currently undigitised and digitising them, but I think increasingly reducing the avoidable contact will involve improving the services that we currently have. There are still some areas, however, like inheritance tax, where it's largely paper-based and we do want to actually just digitise. So we have to get that combination right.
You want to come in, Nathan, as well?
On that, if I can, Chair, thank you. And so, Jim, just building on what you've said, because I recognise that there are parts of the service that are completely paper-based, and I think the papers refer to something like 22 million items of correspondence that was sent to HMRC, which is an extraordinary number given we're in 2024, and it is only really slightly less than the number of phone calls that the organisation takes. So there is clearly a need to move from paper-based to digital-based. So I recognise that. The question I wanted to ask was about the digital services roadmap, which presumably is, and I think you've already said this, the investment over a period of time to improve the platforms for digital. There tends to sometimes be, with organisations, an approach that really focuses on the back room to get the infrastructure in place. And whilst that is important, given that some of the feedback on customer services and the experience of people, do you recognise that really there needs to be emphasis on front of house? So the website, the telephone, and so I would urge that that strategy that's being developed, the roadmap that's being developed for what will be a very expensive endeavour, because IT and digital always is, that there is a important balance that gets the backroom infrastructure in place, but actually also addresses what are critical customer services problems.
I completely agree. I mean, because I was about to say, no, we've got to get a balance right, but that's what you said. I mean, we have been investing both in our back office systems. For example, we've got a unique customer record program, which has been about improving how we bring together the data that for our customers under the different heads of tax that they deal with us, so that we can present a single picture to them of all their services, together with investment in the frontline services that they actually use to interface with us. So, a key development for us, for example, has been our app. We are one of the only central government departments that has one, and that has seen very rapid take up. So last year we saw a 64% increase in the usage of that. It was used almost 89 million times, and we are currently running a campaign to get the number of users up to 6 million by the end of this year, because that we can see that is a favoured way for customers to deal with us. And so, for example, today, if you want to claim child benefit, you can go onto our mobile app on your mobile phone and do that entirely on your phone.
I want to go one further point. The incredible amount of correspondence comes through the post. you're almost single-handedly trying to keep the post office afloat by the looks of the way you operate. But why so much resistance for the use of emails? I know that security is often mentioned, but letters do go missing as well.
Yeah, I'll let Myrtle come in a moment on the electronic sort of communication channel we want to have. But first of all, to deal with paper. So yes, a lot of our processes drive our customers into having to write to us through the post. We also have some legislation which requires us to do things in writing through the post, so we have been working through how we can digitise our own outbound services. So for example, if you're in pay-as-you-earn, whereas previously we had to send you a pay-as-you-earn code through the post, you can sign up for a service where you get all of that online. But in terms of the channel, I'll perhaps let Myrtle pick up.
Yeah, and I think that email is a channel, but we use it very sparingly for the same reason that you outlined about security. So what we would be looking to do is encourage secure messaging through the app or through the personal tax account, and investing in asynchronous messaging as well. And that is a far better and a far more secure way for us to be communicating with customers, not email.
Right, so how successful is the rollout of that, given that you're still getting this enormous volume of correspondence? You've then got to scan it and file it. I mean, it's incredibly expensive.
So I mean, just picking up how we deal with post at the moment. So we have a digital mail service, so all of the paper post goes into a central location, it gets scanned, and then it is allocated to our colleagues on screen, so we're not moving paper around the organisation. In terms of the new channel for secure messaging, I mean, that is an area of our digital services where we are clearly behind many other organisations, and that would be something that we would be looking for investment for as part of the roadmap.
In looking at those changes, did you talk to the NHS about it? Because they got a very similar challenge with the amount of paper they use and a reluctance to move towards electronic means because of security. So do you have cross-fertilisation of ideas and meetings with them to discuss how they're approaching it as well?
I can't say about the NHS specifically. I mean, there is a central data and digital office and a government digital service in the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, and they are a sort of central resource where we all use to coordinate. Certainly, when it comes to the mobile app, we are conscious that the NHS has got a very extensive use of it. After them, certainly in central government, we are probably the next biggest users, and so I think there are things we could learn from them, but I can't say what engagement we have with the NHS.
It's an important question of vulnerable customers, Lloyd.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, if I just might sort of take us back to earlier in this year, I've got two press releases in front of me here, published by HMRC. One was on the 19th of March and the second one was the day after, on the 20th of March. On the 19th, you said basically you're going to shut down a large portion of your phone line services for a big chunk of the year. Understandably, a lot of people thought this was an absolutely bonkers idea, and 24 hours later you had to issue another press release saying that actually you weren't going to shut down a large number of your helpline services for a big chunk of the year. Surely you must accept that this sort of one-day car crash has done sort of lasting damage to the credibility of HMRC. So what are you therefore going to do to restore taxpayers' trust in HMRC to be able to provide even the most basic services like a helpline?
Yeah, it was clearly not what I want to see. As I said earlier, we were in a situation where we simply did not have enough resources to deal with all of the contact that we were receiving, and therefore we were trying things that would enable us to prioritise which contact we dealt with. For example, dealing with vulnerable customers, but pushing other customers to try online. That was badly received, and we were given additional resources by the government to do it in a different way, and therefore we withdrew that decision, and instead, with £51 million, we were able to deploy additional advisors on the helpline.
And when that went out on the 19th of March, did you think this is going to go down badly with the public?
We knew from the pilots that we had run the previous year that there was a high degree of scepticism about whether people would be able to get the services they needed whilst we did this. On the other hand, we knew from the pilots that whilst there was resistance to it, the evaluation of them showed that it had not overall impacted on people's ability to file their returns and make their payments and do the things they needed to do.
But if there was a high degree of scepticism, why did you do it anyway? And then obviously that scepticism was proved to be accurate because a day later the whole thing sort of collapsed.
The position we were in at that time, if we had done nothing, was that we were going to get levels of demand that we simply could not service, and we were not going to be able to prioritise what that demand is. So vulnerable customers or customers with complex affairs who needed to speak to an advisor were not going to be able to get through because others ahead of them in the queue with simple queries that could have been done online were sort of blocking the queue. So that was, in the position that we were in with inadequate resources, that was what we thought was the best way.
Do you ask for additional resources?
Well, yes, well, had I asked for additional resources, we certainly are transparent with ministers and Treasury about the resources we have and the service levels we can give and what the different options are for what you can do with that.
Don't you think, I appreciate the benefit of hindsight is a marvellous thing, but as Chief Executive, do you not think actually a more urgent and pressing demand for additional resources would have been a wiser approach, rather than sort of taking us all up the hill with this first press release saying we're going to shut down these services for a big chunk of the year, only for then 24 hours later to say, oh no, the public are in uproar, we're going to therefore restore these services, and then ask for additional resources so you can get on with the job?
So I feel my job is to advise ministers, here is the best that I think we can do with the resources that we've got, here is what I think is the impact is, here are the different options for managing that. It is for ministers to decide which options they want to go with.
Would you blame ministers for not heeding your calls then?
No, I mean, I give ministers advice and options. I believe that we give good advice, but the choices ultimately are for ministers. Understandably, funding is tight. Treasury and HMRC will always look to do our job with the minimum funding that we possibly can. But in this instance, £51 million of additional funding meant that we did not have to take it.
So do you think, following the advice that you gave, Sir Jim, to the Minister, they made the wrong decision?
That's not for me to say. Clearly, the decision was changed pretty quickly. A different judgment was reached very, very quickly.
Moving on then to this point around support for vulnerable customers. This committee last February found that HMRC customer service had reached an all-time low. Do you not agree that this sorry state of affairs has been very, very damaging to your credibility, and therefore there needs to be a specific piece of work which looks at how HMRC reaches out to vulnerable customers that find accessing your services particularly difficult, so we could begin to restore trust?
I'll let Myrtle come in a moment to describe the services that we give to vulnerable customers. I agree, of course, that the service levels that we have been giving, that we give in the last couple of years and the first half of this year, are far, far below the levels that we would want to give, and I can understand why customers are dissatisfied with that, and I am dissatisfied with that as well, and I'm pleased that we are offering better service levels now. But we've got specific services for customers who are vulnerable or need extra support, which I'll let Myrtle describe.
So we have always had extra support provisions for vulnerable customers. We have uplifted that support by 20%, recognising that we've now got customers with more complex needs. We have also provided £5.5 million of funding to 12 community and voluntary organisations to outreach and help customers, and we continuously monitor those and work with partners to help us reach out to more vulnerable customers. Mm-hmm.
Moving on then, if I may, so the most recent HMRC customer service report estimates that as many as 20% of customers need additional assistance using digital services, but it also isn't clear that HMRC have set aside sufficient capacity or expertise to provide that additional customer support. So can you just, again, try and reassure this committee what you are doing for those 20% of customers, and that is 7 million customers, who basically can't use all the digital services because they don't have the additional assistance or resource that's needed to get them into that point?
Yes, I mean, I think it's a key example of the challenge that we face. We need to be able to concentrate our advisors on that type of customer. And so the more that we can get the digitally able customers to self-serve online, the more we can devote our resources to that. So that is why our strategy is about reducing avoidable contact, so that we can give a better service to those types of customers.
Could you go into a little bit more detail then? What are you doing to ensure that those 7 million taxpayers are not shut out of accessing HMRC services? How are you assisting them to use digital services where they can?
Okay, so first of all, how we make sure that they can access us, which is the key point, and that is about making those customers who are digitally able more aware of our digital services and encouraging them to use them, and to reassure them that if at the end of their digital journey they find they can't do what they need to do, there is an advisor at the end of that journey on web chat who will help them. That improves accessibility to those customers who need assistance, whether it's assistance to use our digital services, or if they're digitally excluded, someone to do things for them, or if they simply have complex affairs where they know that reading our guidance is not going to give them the answer they need, that they've got an expert advisor at the end of the line that they can reach. We have an online service help desk which specialises in assisting customers who should be able to use our digital services but need assistance to do so. And I don't know if you want to add more about that.
Yeah, no, we've got our online help desk, we've got our extra support team, and also our advisors on the phone when they encounter a customer and they determine that the customer needs extra support, they will refer them on to the extra support team as well.
And then, if I may finally, just to circle back to where I started with this particular part of our session, looking at what happened during the spring and the clear damage that did do to the credibility of HMRC, and again, and looking at the comments that you made, Sir Jim, after that happened, would you accept that actually perhaps the most useful thing HMRC could do to restore its credibility is to own up and say, we got this wrong, and to apologise? Because actually the public backlash was immense over those 2 days, and actually I think people don't have much trust in HMRC to do basic things right and to provide basic services, and actually owning up, putting your hands up and apologising would probably be the best way to actually send a clear signal to the public that you want to restore trust and that you want to do better.
I certainly apologise to customers that we have not been delivering good service levels for the last couple of years and for the first half of this year. When it comes to customer trust, I think I would disagree with you. We know that we've got good levels of satisfaction from customers, and we know that customers. I believe customers do trust us to look after their information and to assist them, but we simply have not had the resources to cope with the volume of contact, and I apologise that means that some customers have not been able to access us or have had to wait longer than is reasonable to do so.
Thank you.
Rebecca Paul.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to pull together a little bit all the different things we've been talking about today, because we obviously started talking about the tax gap and the importance of bringing that down, and clearly in addressing that and bringing it down, it's intrinsically linked to the customer service element, because obviously the taxpayer needs help at the right time in order to prevent issues. I don't want to obviously go over what we've already gone over in quite a lot of detail already, but I think one of the things I was quite concerned about reading the report is obviously when you did close the self-assessment helpline in the summer of 2023, only 2 working days notice was given. Actually, that felt very, very quick. I don't think I've ever seen such a substantial decision that's going to have such an impact taken with so little notice. And obviously the VAT registration helpline permanently closed May 2023, and that was 3 days notice, and obviously I appreciate that the digital piece is the piece that you're hoping to grow, but I would just suggest that those notice periods are too short in my view. So first it would be good to get your view on those notice periods, and apologies to ask this question again, but I think it's really important for clarity. I know the Chair has already raised it, but do you plan to close or restrict your phone lines again in the future?
I would repeat, we have no plans for any further helpline closures or restrictions. When it comes to the advance notice that we gave for those pilots. I mean, we've heard feedback that people were surprised at the short notice. I think from our point of view, we weren't entirely clear what giving more notice would have gained people. More fundamentally, it must be true that our customers sometimes need to speak to us to find out what they need to do, and therefore, giving a good customer service must in some way help with tax compliance. However, we have actually struggled, and we've worked with the National Audit Office to try and get an evidential link between customer service and tax compliance, because it would be a way of an extra way, if you like, of persuading the Treasury that it is something to invest in. If we could show that there are tax revenues at stake, it's actually very difficult to prove evidentially. And indeed, some of the evaluation of the temporary closure of the self-assessment helpline showed that during that period when we were not offering the helpline service, it did not appear to materially affect people's ability to meet their obligations. So, so I think it's a work in progress to demonstrate in an evidential way the benefits that our customer service has to tax compliance. But in any event, there's a good case for giving a good customer service, whatever that shows.
I mean, I would suggest more notice is always better. So, for example, if I knew next week I was going to register for VAT and for whatever reason I didn't feel I was able to use the digital option, if I had more than 2 or 3 days notice, that would allow me to make the call at the right time in order to get that help. So I would suggest that generally a bit more notice is helpful. I
understand that. So it's difficult for me to promise that if we do it again we give more notice, because I'm saying we've no plans to do it again.
So, yes,
but in any event, we have no plans for any further restrictions. But if we ever did, we hear the comment about the...
Jim, why do you keep using the language "no plans"? And as the chief executive of HMRC, can't you give us greater clarity?
Greater clarity than we have no plans to do this.
We're not going to do it.
Yeah, we are. Thank you, Chair. Because actually, when you did it at the start of this year, it was a calamity. When you did those pilots last year, which Rebecca's highlighted, it was a very little notice. Why can't you just say we're not going to do it?
I cannot say what my successors will want to do in 5 years' time
you're
or 10 years'
the chief
time.
executive.
While I'm chief executive, there will be no closures of...
Thank you.
Thank you. That's incredibly reassuring. Thank you for that. And just whilst I'm talking about VAT as well, so obviously right now you will have real life pressures with respect to, I expect you're getting an increase in VAT registration requests in light of the change in rules coming, so various schools and whatnot. It would be really good to understand, now that you're going through that, how many of those taxpayers are able to register digitally in a straightforward way versus those that need to call up and ask various questions. Yeah. Have you got any sense of that at the moment? Yes. I would imagine that started now. You're under that pressure.
Virtually all VAT registrations are done online. We have an online VAT registration service which has virtually 100% take-up. Currently, however, some of those we will then have to intervene in because we see some risks, for example. So it's not a fully automated process. We risk assess them and we may well intervene. However, about our service standards, we have 2 service standards, a 20 working day and a 40 working day service standard. More than 80% are completely processed within 20 working days and more than 95% within 40 working days.
That's very helpful. Thank you so much.
Okay. Right. Well, thank you all very much for attending today. I see there's probably a little relief across the table there that we're coming to the end of our questioning, but thank you for attending and answering our questions. I think a particular thank to you, Sir Jim. I think you are announced your retirement in the spring, so probably this is the last time you come before the committee.
I'll be back on the 16th of December.
Oh, right. So I'm anticipating your exit a little earlier. So I was going to say perhaps that gives you some relief thinking about your retirement and at least one of the pleasures of it. But we can come back to that again on the 16th of December. But thank you all again for coming today and giving evidence to us. we will be publishing an uncorrected transcript of the hearing today in the coming days, and we'll of course consider the evidence we've been given and then produce a report in due course, perhaps with some further questions and issues we'd like to raise with you to await further response from yourselves in due course. But thank you for coming, and that brings to the end our procedures for today. Order.